Welcome to the Edifice Complex, the property design and development podcast. Let your hosts Adam Muggleton and Robert Bean keep you up with who is innovating and doing great work, perspective on the adjacent possible, and challenges to the status quo.
Welcome to the Edifice Complex. I'm Robert Bean, your unofficial mediator, here with my colleague, official agitator, heavy emphasis on agitator, friend and Yoda of most everything to do with buildings, Mr. Adam Muggleton. Say hello, Sir Yoda.
Hello there. Okay, interesting conversation today. One of my favorite hot topics. At ASG, our Facades team is killing it everywhere, and Facades is something that makes money. So I'm very interested in that right now.
Yeah, today's guests are actually part of a design team with Behnisch Architekten. Their names are associated with iconic buildings around the world, including the Harvard University Science and Engineering Complex in Boston. And the DNA for the discussion today was actually triggered by a rant of mine on LinkedIn about indoor environmental quality. And it's always irritated me that design culture shifts the responsibility of meeting occupant needs to the HVAC and lighting engineers, when in fact indoor environmental quality begins long before those folks start crunching numbers. Pushing architecture and enclosure and interior systems out in front of the mechanicals and electricals also resonated with Behnisch architect and facade designer Michelle Lee. Michelle began her academic journey with a Bachelor of Arts in History and Art from Swarthmore College, followed by her Master's of Architecture and Master of Urban Plan, Architecture, and Urban Design from Harvard University. And it was she that introduced us to partner Erik Hegre, who received his Master of Architecture from the University of Oregon and a Bachelor of Science in Architecture from the University of Wisconsin. And we thought that between the four of us, we could have a robust discussion on integrated design, the state of industry, sustainability, technology, and any other topics that came up. Erick and Michelle, welcome to the program.
Thank you.
Yeah. For those who are wondering, the firm you're with was a practice that actually started, I think, in Stuttgart, Germany, and you have branches, I think, in Munich, Boston, Massachusetts, Los Angeles, California, and it was started over 35 years ago by the son of well-known German architect Gunther Behnisch, and I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that right, so you guys maybe can correct me on that. What brought the two of you together on that firm? Maybe give you a little history of your backgrounds. Michelle, go ahead first.
Okay, so first of all, our firm is called Behnisch. So if you think of Danish, like the pastry, or Bjarke Ingels, so Danish with a B.
Got it.
So my origin story, I was born in British Hong Kong, as you would say, the former British colony, before 1997. So you know that I'm, older than that. My first memories of Hong Kong were actually of a facade. I don't know if you know the Jardin House. It's like right by the Star Ferry by Joseph Gardner, has tons of circles. And as like a kid, I just thought I thought it was so cool that there was a building that didn't have orthogonal windows. So that was one of my first memories. So it's no surprise I became really interested in architecture and facades. I grew up in Maryland, also, formed by my childhood experiences. My parents built like a prefab, like sustainable house. I didn't even know what architecture or sustainability was, but the company is called Acorn, and they do these kind of prefab post and beam wooden houses, and they kind of ship that technology around the Northeast. So it was a pretty atypical house, and I was always very kind of attuned with the seasons because of the philosophy of that prefab house. What else? Yeah, then I ended up studying art and history at Swarthmore outside of Philadelphia, where Erick and I just finished an amazing building right on, like, next to this metro stop that I used to get off all the time and just, look at the city. And now we've filled it with this amazing project.
Cool.
Let's see. Yeah, that's basically it. Yeah, and then I met Robert because I loved his rant on LinkedIn. I was like, I like this guy. He's like, he's an ASHRAE guy, but he's talking about, designing, designing out of those problems before you, pump in all the HVAC stuff. So
Yeah, that's exactly it. Yeah. Thanks for that. Eric, go ahead.
Yeah, sure. First, great to be on the show. Thank you. If I think about the story of how I got here, in hindsight, it's very clear. But I would say in the process, you're kind of always reaching. You're kind of always trying to figure out what is it that's linking the next thing to the next thing, and that's going to make a little bit more sense in a moment. Because I remember sitting in architecture school, very unsatisfied with lectures about things about the built environment, about the way buildings work, all the little parts and pieces that buildings need to have, when there's a whole world out there of all of these things that we could just go look at. And that led me down this path of going to a design build school in Vermont, taking all my tax return money one summer and just going for it, hitchhiking, linking together one-way trips. Like, I had no money, and then I camped out on a tent platform for 2 weeks, while I was taking this class. And the class was treehouse design build. And at the time I was 20 years old, and I was thinking, this is going to pull together, these ideas that really, kind of will crystallize for me. Fast forward, I ended up going back to Vermont and working for the founder of the Yestermorrow Design Build School, this guy, John Carnell, who was a mentor of mine and really kind of instrumental in letting me do architecture and do building, and really pushing the importance of the line connected to the built thing. I was spending my mornings drawing stuff, going out into the world, and then having to make it. So there was an accountability there. And it worked both ways. And I think when I got done with that experience, and I would say I never really got done with that experience, I was enabled to kind of realize that I could build anything, and I could draw anything. I could build anything, which is a kind of a dangerous thing, I would say, because should you be able to design and build anything, so there was an ethos out there in Vermont, also about, how we should build and the kind of, what are we building for, that I think kind of folded into that. And fast forward a bit, through graduate schools and finding other people that are kind of cut from the same cloth. There was an opportunity to see some very similar ways of working or thinking, but different, in Behnisch Architekten. And I kept on getting led to Behnisch Architekten, even though I'd stop there and then move away, and then stop there and move away. And so there was a bit of a natural fit. I would say, however, though, that the kind of idea of the design build combined with like kind of a German tradition doesn't always jive. It's really not that ad hoc. So I think the sandbox that I've been playing in here in Boston kind of combines those two things. And anyway, I still build and design tree houses up at Yestermorrow. And I would say that I use that as a way to kind of tap into these kind of roots about, how we should be living in the world. It's a great metaphor, for instance. Like, how do we design and build in nature without despoiling the very nature that supports you? And I don't think I'm the original one who said that statement, but the tree is probably the best example of what could happen if you don't. And I think the tree is no different than an urban lot, a rural lot, any kind of other kind of context. So I think this idea that we're not predetermining our outcomes, if you do that in a tree, for instance, it's for naught. And I think that kind of thinking is what really attracted me to kind of pursue, work with Behnisch, and what I think is kind of underlying what a lot of our approach, I would say, today in our work, both here and in Germany. So hopefully that's a good introduction. I love talking about, like, so you were doing tree houses and now you're doing these things. Like, let's talk more about that. But we should move on from that. But that's a little bit of the kind of the underpinnings of what kind of wakes me up every morning.
But it's a good illustration that all of the fundamental principles apply to every project that involves people, and it doesn't matter how big or complex or simple the project is. All of the fundamental principles apply. And we knew this discussion could go anywhere. And I'll take it down one path, and that has to do with existing buildings and retrofitting or restoring buildings that maybe even had vernacular architecture as part of their DNA, and it actually functions, but just due to time and weathering Mother Nature on the building over many, many decades, that it's starting to wear, and then we have to restore it. What's the philosophy between the two of you on the restoration of old buildings, and how much effort should go into the architectural part of it and the enclosure part of it, and then all the other interior mechanicals? I mean, there's a certain amount of budget that that you're working with in terms of restoring these. Where do your philosophies sort of lie in that?
Michelle, do you want to take that first?
Um,
I have a couple thoughts.
yeah. Why don't you start?
Sure. I actually, when we look back at actually a lot of our work here in North America, most of the projects that we've been working on have been some form or another of a adaptive reuse or a kind of remodel project. And for us, I think that the one thing that you can do is, one, reuse the things that you've already made the investment in. That in terms of the urban context and existing buildings, we should be looking at the value that they can create there, that we can build upon. And I think the anything else is all going to be stuff that we got to buy fresh again, or and then all the kind of implications of building new. So we've been trying to see, like, maybe I riff on that for a second, Robert. Like, for instance, we have a shell of a building, and maybe you got to take it all the way. Oh, sorry, guys. Hold up for a second. Is there too much background noise? Is that going to?
A little bit, yeah.
A little bit.
Yeah.
Okay. I hate to break the. Is this going to be a problem in your audio?
No, I mean, it will just be there. That's all. So
it'll just be there.
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah.
All right. All right.
Yeah.
Picking back up on that.
Yeah.
If we, maybe there were some decisions in this existing building at the time that relied on maybe the wrong thing. Maybe it ignored the comfort of an occupant, for instance, and made up for it for all of these other ways that we know how to do. The ability to kind of, and then that maybe doomed the project because these things relied on something you plug into the wall, and that thing over time is just going to break down. So maybe, looking at an existing building, taking all the things that didn't work about it and finding the gem that might still be there, and then building upon that is a really good investment. It probably makes more financial sense. And you have an opportunity to kind of make something that people love again. I mean, the whole reason people trash things is that people don't love it anymore. And why don't they love it? It's probably not very comfortable. It costs them a ton of money, and it's not very efficient when it comes down to energy, which if you have an ethos about that, that's one thing, but usually it comes down to dollars.
Yeah.
So yeah, we work with some clients who, have a building, and part of the brief is like, we want to replace this building. And the first thing we do is like, we ask them, is there a way for us to save some part of the structure or reuse the bones? And we try to find the most, like, the things that people love about it. Maybe it's skylights, but sometimes it just comes down to cost. They've already investigated. Maybe it's a public school, and, it just doesn't, they can't renovate it in a way that fulfills their needs with the budget. That's the sad reality, is it's easier to start from scratch. One thing that I really like to do is just, put some design options out there, even after they say no. And sometimes you can come up with a compelling story or show them an image that makes them believe that the building is worth saving. We're working on a project right now that I actually reached out to you, Robert, about. Remember when I asked you why brutalist buildings had like no windows? It's always a little tiny, it looks like a bunker, right? You see this all over, like every campus in the United States, right? These 60s, early 70s buildings, there are no views. So people hate them and they just want to destroy them. So we're always thinking about ways to be faithful to, the kind of large spans, the beautiful open spaces of these concrete structures, but, bring in more daylight, integrate greenery, like the Barbican. Is there a way to make it cool again?
Yeah. And the reason why I asked the question, Adam knows this, but I tend to keep my hands involved. I mean, I'm retired from as a practitioner in engineering, but I still like to do construction work. And so I do a lot of volunteer work. I also have some friends that have housing on near campus here in the city of Edmonton, and so I do some restoration work. And we just finished a big restoration work of our own house in just south of or east of Calgary. And it was a tough decision because all of these are tough decisions because it's when you do restoration and renovation work and you watch the construction bins leave. I mean, all the demolished materials end up in the bins and they end up in the landfills. Maybe there's some recycling program that you can get involved in, but it's every time, a bin leaves and a new one comes in and you're just thinking to yourself, like, is this the best decision that we're making here? And then you go through this, well, maybe we should have just demolished it in the beginning, like just imploded the whole thing and started from scratch. And I know for myself, I struggle with those, watching that stuff leave.
I do too. And I wrestle with that in New England, as a homeowner and a place where I live, watching the housing stock kind of come down one house at a time. And this is a really hard problem. And I don't think we're so unique, but New England has a problem where these houses were constructed 100 years ago. They don't have any insulation. They've been they're running on fossil fuels for the most part. To do the low energy or the heat pump conversion means that you're either just doing an air system, and you guys know all this stuff. But as a homeowner, I keep and wanting to kind of evolve my house, I run into these problems where I love my radiator, but I don't have enough insulation on my house to run it at 120 degrees. I need to run it at 180 degrees, and there's so many houses that I'm seeing that are very handsome, lovely contributions to the character of the neighborhood that somebody comes in and it just goes into a bunch of containers in a day. It only takes like 3 hours. Yeah. And it's an easy, quick decision. And you can put a price tag on it. It might be a little bit higher than, that you think, but all of a sudden it's gone and you've got a clean slate. It's a different kind of thinking that is one that it's hard to find, I think, in a lot of the construction worlds, to embrace the thing that's already there and wrap your head around. We're gonna work with this thing. We're gonna find opportunities and things, because they just want to have everything predetermined or it fall into a predictable timeline or bean counting exercise.
Yeah,
and you don't get that with the existing stock. It's an exploration. It's a impatience. I think in so many other ways.
There are so many problems here, but the big ones I think are the built environment is an expression of culture, right? It signals status, culture, all sorts of things, right? As well as being, shelter. So there's a cultural phenomenon. There's no cheap issues with a facade. Everything is $1 gazillion. That's the other problem.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then tastes change, right? So the brutalism's slowly coming back into Barbican. I've always had an ambition to live in the Barbican. That is the classic example of brutalist architecture. And that is so fashionable now, that place. Try buying an apartment there. See how many zeros you need at the end of that check. Right. So, everything comes back. But certainly in the UK, where I go to quite regularly at the moment, there's a very famous road in UK in London called Oxford Street. It's like the main shopping fair. And there's a shop there called Marks and Spencer's. And Marks and Spencer's is a British institution. It's not really a supermarket. It's a bit more. It's the only thing my wife and I miss from the UK, quite frankly. And there is a 1930s Marks and Spencer's on Oxford Street that was going to be demolished, and really like low carbon, high efficiency buildings would be put in its place, right? And this had planning permission. So this had a building permit. And then the Twitter mob arrived. What about embodied carbon? And because politicians are craven assholes, they all caved and withdrew the planning permission. And this went backwards and forward. Now it's back on, and then it was off. But what it came down to was the public square got that planning permission pulled because they decided you can't knock down this old building. And if you did a carbon analysis, it's probably better to knock it down and build something better. But then there's the emotion, the cultural attachments to it, right? So this whole thing is just a gargantuan mess. And it's almost impossible to do the right thing sometimes, right? And the other thing people forget is architects are employed at the pleasure of the client. But people go, I mean, Norman Foster doesn't need me to defend him, but we wound up interviewing a prof in the UK, Barnabas was, I can't remember.
Calder.
Yes,
Calder.
yes.
Yeah.
And
Michelle, yeah.
I got into a Twitter war with him because, not Twitter, LinkedIn spat, because he was going, if Norman Foster just stood his ground, everything'd be good. And I used to be a developer in the UK. And I can tell you, Norman Foster works for me. If I decide we're not doing it, we ain't doing it. And a lot of academics don't understand that. Architects, you ever seen Downton Abbey, right? So my lord upstairs, he's the client with the money. When he rings that bell, who runs up? The head butler. You know who that is? That's the architect. He's below stairs, right? Yeah. The architect doesn't have the power you think they have. You obviously know this, right? So I don't know how we do this without legislation, right? So the way it's going in the UK, carbon accounting, embodied carbon, operational carbon, that balance, that's where it's going, I think. Because that's where
agreed.
Opinion wants
Adam,
to
yeah, but you bring up a point that not only applies to architects, but all professionals. I mean, one of our ethical requirements has to do with protecting the environment, health and safety, all these things. And I remember when I was practicing in the conflicts that I again went through in terms of clients wanting to do stuff, and you'd look and these people had lots of money and wanted to spend it, and you look at their aspirations and you're going, yeah, this just doesn't sit well with me, And then a big one was that had to do with passive houses. The last two residential projects I worked on were passive houses in Vancouver, right? They were both over 15,000 square feet. I'm just like, I couldn't get my head around a 15,000 square foot passive house and like the whole ethos of what it was all about. It just,
but it's a status signal. The person who did that was signaling virtue and status, right?
Yeah. So how do you two as architects, I mean, I can't think of another profession right now, at least within the world of property development, that is like under the microscope from an ethical point of view, from a future looking point of view. So where do the two of you sort of stand on that?
Well,
go for it.
Yeah, I think it's incredibly empowering, and coming from our firm's background, I mean, as Erick said, we've been around for a really long time, witnessing lots of political cycles. But the thing that's enduring is, respect for nature, people, and communities. And, if you spend your life working on this problem, you have a lot of agency, right? Erick is always talking in the office about moving the market. Architects have a lot of agency in specifying materials, demanding that materials don't have certain chemical properties, demanding that they will be recycled. I mean, we have these reps coming in all the time trying to sell us their products, right? Because we work with big institutional, very prestigious clients. And so we're able to, drive the market and what we specify, what we value. So I personally feel very more empowered than when I started this field 20 years ago, when I was just designing for things to look cool. Now I feel so much more motivated. Maybe I'm just very optimistic. Erick?
No, I think we need the optimism. We do need the optimism. I think I can go a couple different places with that, because I was just talking at a conference recently, and I was looking out at a bunch of architects, and the question is lingering all the time, right? What can we do? And I was really simply saying, like, we go shopping. We write down the shopping list in our drawings and our specifications. We're the ones making the list. And somebody's going to, our clients are going to go hire a contractor to go, shopping, and they're going to buy what's on that list. And so in a way, yes, like we do get the mandate from our owners, from our clients to do and go in particular directions, but we can also advocate, and we can also make the simple decisions with the low-hanging fruit, getting the formaldehyde out, for instance, moving away from PVC, and just opening our eyes. I think that was the one thing that really struck me was we were working on a project in Hamburg, and there was a real drive for natural materials on this project, and really tried in a way almost like the slow food and the food analogies of we don't want to pick anything that we can't pronounce or that our grandmother wouldn't recognize if we said it. There's so many great analogies to material choices in food, but I remember we were vetting this one product, and I said, look, this you got to be careful here because all the material for this, 75% of the material is coming from China, and 25% of the material is PVC from Europe. And and this is a green product. And if I look under the lens of not only the ethical part of this, but also the red list component of it, I can't call this one something that I'm going to use. Anyway, that's the challenge we have, is there's so much data and information and greenwashing, and everybody's using all the right terms. I really get nervous using any of the terms, to be honest, and I just try to focus on saying, well, this has that, and do we really want that? And I that's not a calling it this or this; it's calling it a choice. And it's tough. I also think we have to, if I didn't already say, the advocacy part and showing and educating is so much about what we do, even to the point where it's not even about the architecture so much, it's about the value. One thing that comes to mind in a different way, because we do a lot of science buildings here in the US, and we do some in Germany, but more here. And it's not even an architectural topic, but the topic of how we run the buildings and the safety related to those labs has more of an impact on the energy use than it does anything we could do architecturally. And that's just getting users and safety people, for instance, in connection with the administrators. And it's not an architectural problem, it's a people thing. And for some reason, as architects, we find ourselves being right in the middle of that, being able to broker those kind of relationships, even within an institution, but it has a huge impact on the energy efficiency of that building. In some cases, 6-figure kind of energy numbers at the end of the day, which helps it run more efficiently and safer. I don't know, maybe that's too much of a tangent, but I wear the architect hat, but more often than not, I feel like it's not necessarily the architect hat that I'm employing in the areas where it makes a big difference. I might actually just go one more place there, which is to say that I question if the carbon counting leads to a beautiful building that people want to keep. And this is just the checks and balances, right? What's the driver here? And it's not, a building that's made up of a whole bunch of materials that are, say, inert or safe for humans or whatever. Is that going to make the right building? And I think a little bit of the quandary here is that we think that we can make architecture with all of these terms and directives with the same parts and pieces, or with the same architecture. If maybe I'm not saying that right. We kind of go into seeing a 3-story thing, it's an office park, and you had mentioned that before. We have an idea of maybe what that's going to look like. And I don't think you can come in and just sub out the materials for more healthy materials, for instance, or sub out the systems for more efficient systems and expect it to look the same. So the design piece is really, really key here. And we have to be driving the design, and then all of these other things kind of come into place. If we make a good design, then we chase the carbon part of it. If we make a good design, we chase the materials part of it. And those kind of decisions, I think, at least what we've seen, they kind of evolve, but you can't predetermine what that's going to be. So I don't know, that may be a different fork in the road for the conversation, but
for our listeners, the architectural community, has been to some degree a punching bag by the engineering community. And when you talk about these things, like both of you, when you talk about sort of the thought process that goes into it, it's not just a matter of taking creative ideas and put it into 3-dimensional models. It's way more complex than that. And I think it would serve our industry in the long term for more collaborative work between engineering and architects through a common denominator, in terms of the health sciences. Like we talk about formaldehyde, for example, and getting that out of materials. Like that's really valuable. When I think about, for example, there was at one time in California, and I think you guys have an office in California, there was an importer bringing in engineered wood floors that had a high formaldehyde content. And, as soon as shortwave radiation hits it, it heats it up. And now you're promoting VOC emissions into the space, right? But also particulate. And so now you're talking about lighting and air quality. And then because of the shortwave radiation, now you're talking about thermal comfort. And I think, and I'd like to hear your thoughts on this, is that the human occupant is the common denominator to all of this discussion, whether it's the engineering sciences, the architectural sciences, or the health science. It's the occupant. Do you see a time where all of us as professionals can come together to design buildings in a holistic manner, without the silos that sort of still seem to exist, even after all that we know about integrated design? They still exist. How do we get beyond that using the occupant?
I think if I look back, we used to do that at one point. You might argue that we used to do that. And I would say putting that in focus as that's the key client. It's a little cliche, but our client is someone who's going to be using the space. And I recently heard a really great quote that I'll adapt here, which is, we designed ourselves into this mess. We can design ourselves out of this mess. So if we built all the systems that got us here, we can build the systems to get us out of it too. And I think one analogy that I think is the antithesis of how I think Michelle and I and our colleagues here like to work, and a lot of people, I wouldn't say this, we're not special in that way, is, or we don't, I don't think you can go out and design like a building or a facade or something like that, and then just hand it over to somebody and say, now make it happen. And I mean, there's so much left on the table there. A great analogy in this would be, looking at how we treat civil engineers. You brought up engineers. I feel like, civil engineers, they get inherited so many problems that they're just directed to solve. And I would say a lot of times a lighting designer is even in that same role now. Yeah. And then it's assumed in a way that a lighting designer has everything to do with things that plug into buildings. And the lighting designers that we're fortunate to work with are really talented people, are the ones that are telling us and giving us feedback and working on the team in a collaborative way to kind of not plug anything in at all. Right. That's a lighting designer, right? It's not specifying fixtures. So the lighting designer is really, a key person in creating, the envelope, of a building. And then they come in, with some of the electrical stuff. And I think those are the kind of arrangements and the way we need to be looking at the design problem and the use of a multidisciplinary team, both within the building industry, but then even beyond. Anyway, that's my 2 cents on that.
So like in Michelle, in terms of facade design, like you would be intimately connected to the lighting folks in terms of the apertures and do you also get involved in the fenestration systems, like in terms of specifying glass and coatings, all of that?
Yeah. The whole 9 yards. And I go in as deep as 12 feet into the building too. I'm just joking. Yeah, Eric and I work really closely together. One of my favorite phases in the design is right, and this is where we bring in Trans-Solar. We have this kind of suite of our dream team. We usually work with Trans-Solar climate engineers. I don't know if I think you might be familiar. Didn't Eric Olson do a podcast with you, Robert? We work with Lamb, the lighting consultant. He was the guy who started it was architect engineer from MIT. So it's like a really small ecosystem, like between Germany and the kind of academic community here in Boston and Cambridge. We work with Knippers Helbig, and during schematic design, we're always laying on our goals as it relates to human comfort, which actually, as it turns out, the idea of human comfort is expanding from just being inside the building for the building users to outside, right? So how facades impact microclimates, how water runs off a facade, and how certain chemicals can leach into the water system, right? We're expanding our definition of who the human is, right? And now it's this global issue where we're heating up the entire planet, right? So, I mean, our consultants are people that we respect a lot, and they're a very core part of our team. And none of the facades that we have designed and constructed would have been possible or look the way they are without deeply engaging them and respecting them and really trusting their expertise. And I work very closely, and they're like my friends. I want to give a shout out to Dan Wiseman, Shamil from Knippers Helbig. Erick and I have like this little group that we do projects with over and over again. Yeah, we consider them our friends. They're almost like an extension of our office.
Yeah.
Well, that's the IDP, right? That's the dream team.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
it has all the
right,
hallmarks, but without the maybe like the contract that nobody likes, or some people like it.
Yeah.
I think you take all the good stuff about it and you implement that and find a mechanism that everybody can work within.
The Edifice Complex will continue in just a moment.
Are you struggling with paperwork, spreadsheet overload, and project management? Then Blue Rhythm is the solution to help you. Streamline your commissioning and project management process. Go paperless, increase efficiency, and save money. Blue Rhythm is commissioning and project management software by practitioners for practitioners, adapting to your workflows and processes, and doing things your way. Blue Rhythm provides painless and fast onboarding by bringing your existing workflows, forms, checklists, and issues logs into Blue Rhythm for you. You can use their pre-built templates to customize your commissioning workflows. And Blue Rhythm can fully handle the transition from your current software platform. Blue Rhythm is secure, scalable, and reliable, backed by amazing support, and accessible 24/7 on any Windows, iOS, or Android device. Why are you still using paper and hard-to-control spreadsheets? Start your free Blue Rhythm account today at bluerhythm.com.
And now, back to the show.
Can we talk a little bit about, our history working with these interdisciplinary designers coming from the same like culture? I don't know. I think that might be interesting.
Well, Behnisch
Sure.
Architekten, started back in Germany in Stuttgart in the late 80s. You had mentioned this, Robert, in the introduction.
Yeah.
And some of those kind of founding ideas about human-centered design, about comfort, radiated out to a number of other allied fields in either climate engineering with Trans-Solar or Knippers Helbig, with the kind of structure and facades. And that, of course, all of these firms and companies have kind of branched out from there because, one, they've seen that there's a need for this kind of interdisciplinary thinking and working in buildings. And so we're trying to keep building on this kind of 20 or 30 year relationships. And that the dream team is, us going back and then inviting new people to the party who are seeing opportunities and learning, new ways of doing things and contribute to the overall process. So there are more, I think the other kind of really great thing is that there are more firms like these, more firms like us that are doing kind of this kind of work. You guys that are talking about this, the whole bar is coming up. Yeah. At the same time, I feel like it's also getting a little bit more confusing for everybody who's aspiring. Anyway.
But there was a statistic. Yeah, sorry.
No, go.
Yeah, there was a statistic that I've used in presentations before. There's something like over 70% of all buildings in North America are under 20,000 square feet. Does that sort of resonate with you? It does. Number sort of fit? So in those buildings, there's a lot less requirement for design professionals. When I think about like strip malls and strip office spaces, and they're just like the crappiest architecture and the crappiest mechanicals and electrical, like they're just, they're very much like the brutalist architecture of modern era. How do we? So the world that you work in is not that world, and the world that Adam has worked in and I've worked in is not that world. But that represents, a bulk of our architecture in this continent. So how do we get what we know about architecture pushed down and through into that area?
I think actually we have to build it up. It starts with a kind of anybody can go to any number of big box stores and buy anything and everything that you need, whether you have a license or not, to make buildings, which is amazing to me because I'm a homeowner, and hopefully there's no code officials in my jurisdiction listening to me, but I can't afford to do the kind of little tiny things that I want to do as I go. So I do a lot of repairs, I would say, but you can go buy all of this stuff. And this is a little bit of the DIY kind of thing that I was mentioning. And we don't have, I think, in our understanding or in our art classes, in our school classes, in our public education, a real way to inform people about their environment and the environments that they live in. I think there's a bit of it's a little bit risky to say this, but like, are we really knowledgeable about how our built environments are made and its effect on us? And I think we kind of take it a little bit for granted. I do, for instance, I think it's really easy to just kind of assume that what we see is what we get. And so I think it's less, I agree, like we're going to do projects and we're going to do, they're going to affect a certain quantity of people, but it's not really solving the overall problem, which is, growing things up from the bottom. But I think this idea of education about the built environment and about the values there is really important. How you do that, it means it's a different question. It's a different problem. And I kind of, if I'm looking ahead at maybe I see a real problem, for instance, with the policies about energy efficiency, for instance, that are being pushed down, let's say, on a regulation side. I don't disagree with them. I wholeheartedly agree. But I don't feel that there's a reciprocal building up of understanding and knowledge of how to do these things. I still ride my bike to work every day and see people sheathing houses with the zip system and then putting Tyvek over the top of it. And I'm like, well, I just maybe more is better. I'm not exactly sure, but there might be even a fundamental misunderstanding of like how those two systems are supposed to be working and things like that. So I feel like the design realm and also from how we build, it's more of a kind of building up, I think, of an understanding and knowledge.
Yeah, I mean, when you're chatting there, like what came to my mind was biophilic design is like absent in our school programs. We've had Adam, what's his name again? The founder of
Bill Browning.
Bill Browning, yeah. And I met Bill at an ASID conference. Me, a mechanical engineer, attending an ASID conference was actually an interesting experience. I put my foot in my mouth when I rode from the airport to the conference with one of the senior executives of ASID, and I used the word interior decorator, which was I was quickly corrected in the cab about the difference between an interior decorator and interior designer. Anyways, over the years, I became familiar with Bill and Bill's work, and so we actually had him on the show. And Adam, you and I have talked about this before about what's lacking in terms of education, in terms of public schooling systems, in terms of the importance of the indoor environment. And we went into that down the path of like, we don't teach children, kids, young adults how to shop for an environment, a home, an apartment, a condo. Like that's just completely absent from the educational system.
The most powerful force known to humankind is aggregate demand. Ask BlackBerry how that worked out for them, right?
Right.
They were number one, then they were number 0 2 years later, right? So
Elon Musk might be suffering from that now.
Yeah. The answer to this problem is people need to demand it and it will come, right? There's no demand because no one understands IEQ, IAQ. No one understands what formaldehyde is, or the fact that when the sun comes on the floor, you're sniffing up, you're getting high like a glue sniffer in the 80s. People don't understand this, right? And so therefore there is zero demand for a good home. Right?
Probably because we're so disconnected from making, unless you're Erick and that's just part of your DNA. You just like to build tree houses or fix up your truck. We're so disconnected. I mean, it's like from our food, our clothing, we have no idea where any of this stuff comes from and the impact that it has, on communities, 5,000 miles away, right?
Yeah.
So, we also don't have like super diverse communities where we're friends with tradespeople, people who are actually doing the labor or assembling these things. And I think that's part of it, right? We're very fragmented, and we don't appreciate, the consequences of physical things, even though it defines, our health, our relationships, the economy, extraction. I think it's a fundamental cultural issue.
So
very similar to how we eat.
I will try and
very much so.
Let me trigger both of you here, right? So I was we were doing this green building. I was really freaking moody. I got out of bed wrong side. Everyone was going, we're going to do this, we're going to do that. And there was no budget for it. So I spat out to the design team, unless we're going to do X, Y, and Z, which costs a lot of money, let's just all admit that the supply chain is designing this building, right? Because
I love this topic,
right? Because
yes,
this job sure ain't nameless, but we in the end we did like radiant heating and cooling, displacement, everything.
Yeah,
boy, I had an ongoing gun battle with a contractor for 2 years on this, because everybody wants to stick an air hand unit on the roof, right? Because in North America, why is there no radiant heating and cooling in North America? Because the supply chain will not deliver it. And they'll say, well, there's no demand. But what comes first, the chicken or the egg? I'll let you rank.
Yeah, Adam, you're hitting some trigger points, and I'm ready to just jump into the computer screen. There's a lot of the design profession that picks out of catalogs and puts that on paper and specs. Fine, that's what they do. And I think if I were to kind of address what another way to think about it though is if we're putting things in buildings for their own sake, or they're serving that one purpose, it's the catalog approach. Yeah. And people love to go to the grocery store with the catalog approach, to take that analogy back, because it's one thing, one person puts it in, you can put it on a list and it checks the box. So it's really easy to immediately kind of get into a groove to say, oh, we've put this structural floor in. Now we need a finished material to go over the top of it. Yeah, that happens quite a bit. And then if you try to find the cheapest one, you're going to find that it has all this stuff in it. And I think I was just talking about this the other day with a tour group that, they're looking at something that we did and they're saying, well, why'd you do it that way? And you're like, well, it just can't do it for its own sake. It has to at least do 2 other things. And it'd be better to do 3 things, but it'd be even better if it could do 4 things. And so to go back to your comment, Adam, about like these things can sometimes be really expensive. And how do you want to put these value added aspects of the design into the project, and you want to keep them there so that they can't get leveraged out, and for either cost or whatever reasons. It's going to sound a lot easier than it is, but in an integrated way of thinking about how the building could work, there's no way that you can take them out. It's like the quote from Amadeus, where the king says, there's just too many notes. And then Mozart says, well, which notes should I remove? And there's just as many notes as there are required. And so if I think about, let's say, a structural slab in a fairly technical building, that slab the composite slab, it could be the finished concrete floor, right? If that was palatable to the right folks. It also could be the heating or cooling, through radiant tubing. If you pick the right composite, decking material, it also could be an acoustic material for the underside. So, and then it's obviously the structure. So there's one thing that the building needs, which is a floor, just like a building needs a skin, for instance. And all of a sudden it can do 4 things. And if you take one of them out, you've got to put something back into the project to take its place. And so I like to think that the more we look at opportunities for things to do multiple things at the same time, we can kind of tangentially avoid the problem of something just going away. I co-chair a knowledge community on green roofs and green infrastructure. And we talk a lot about here for the Boston Society of Architecture in Boston. And we talk often about how green roofs are the easiest thing in, let's say, public school projects to get the axe. So much easier to then just put in a membrane roof or something like that, and then put all the mechanics up above. And it's a real struggle to try to make that equation work, where you integrate it in so that it can't actually work its way out. And I'm not trying to diminish how challenging a problem that is, but that seems to be what happens, is because we design it in a way, we add it on in a way that it's an add-on, just by definition. But if it's truly kind of woven into the performance and the experience of the building, that could be an avenue for us to, I think, as a professionals design people, to look at more, is an integrated approach. And that's not a new term either, but I kind of wonder sometimes when I'm hearing the same problems come up and up again, are we taking that approach when we're designing our buildings?
The best way I ever saw to get a green building was a LEED Platinum kickoff meeting, where the client just stood up and said, "If we do not get LEED Platinum, I am suing everyone in this room." And he just walked out. We threw everything at that building. He got LEED Platinum by we got it by skin of our teeth. But boy, did it concentrate the mind when we went into the design charrette afterwards. But okay, look, we've spoken about resi and the lower end. I want to talk about now the high end. Right. So there was that project, I think, Michelle, you were on the laboratory project.
The Vagelos Laboratory for Energy, Science, and Technology.
So I want to talk about high-end facades and adaptive facades that sort of respond. So there is a conflictive objective here for me. I believe true sustainability comes with simplicity and passive design. But everybody's knee-jerk reaction is to layer things on and then visual things on, and everyone gets a pat on the back and they walk away and that building is just a hot mess that no one can run. See active design, active facade. So, and this then bleeds into smart buildings, right? So I had a debate with someone the other day about most people in reality, idea of a smart building is managing energy, not IEQ. Right?
Yeah.
That's another thing I lose my mind on and start. I don't know. Everyone. So with all that on the table, let's talk about that lab project, because I've got to say, it looks pretty goddamn sexy. Which
it works.
A lot
that's
of people,
that's the best.
A lot of people look at it and they're like, this is so crazy. It looks so complicated, but it's really based off of a really simple, passive strategy, which is solar control, right? You see it on these awnings on the Flatiron building from 1920. Any building before 1950 had some sort of fabric sun shading, right? Because it's the easiest way to lower the cooling load when you don't have air conditioning. So it's not really, it looks more complicated than it is. I think maybe because of the solar exposure, we had to use a diagonal geometry, right? Because when the sun is tracking around the east-west solar orientation, it's a diagonal rake that you're trying to follow the sun, right? So that's kind of the way we adapted this diagonal kind of shade when you go like this, when
what
you're
way does that
driving.
facade face primarily?
It faces the east.
East, right.
Yeah, the big elevation that you might have seen, and the west. Because it was a tight urban site and we wanted a very narrow, shallow building in order to bring daylight and fresh air, we were constrained to the east-west kind of primary facades. I don't
Which
know
is like the hardest nut to crack, right? Like that's where you're gonna get.
Yeah, it is.
That's why it looks so complex, right? If it was south, we would have horizontal. And then every facade orientation is different. I'm really interested in this idea of cardinality, which I think, my mathematics husband said that's actually a math term about different numbers and sets. But for me, it's about Cartesian understanding of the way the sun strikes and heats up and creates peak heating and cooling loads, right? So, the aesthetics is driven by, the crazy east-west solar variation.
So it looks like, have you ever seen an image of the King Fahd Library in Riyadh?
Yeah, I love that project. Did you work on it?
No, I go by, our office is really close to there when I'm in Riyadh. But it reminds me a little bit of that. But the problem with that is, right, so that's a maintenance nightmare because it's like a canvas material and you get storm in and it always looks dirty.
Right. Oh, okay.
So then you create an environmental problem because you're using potable water to clean that thing.
Yeah,
which is not a great resource. Not a great resource.
This is the whole thing. My
In
whole
the
thing
Middle
with
East.
solar thermal collectors. I love them. But at the end of the day, you got to clean them with water every so often. Otherwise, they're useless, right?
Yeah.
You know, so there is always a trade-off. But so this facade on this lab, is it active? It doesn't move.
No,
right?
no, it's passive. We don't usually advocate for active systems because they're so complicated. Energy, it's just, they break, they become obsolete. It's like the equivalent of putting an iPhone on a building, right? By the time it's up, it's going to be like 10 years, like in the past, right? The way technology is accelerating is so scary. Like, why would you just put that on the facade?
Yeah.
So it's a fixed sun shading system, just a simple awning that's optimized for the solar exposure.
Okay.
And I don't know if you noticed like the two kind of different colors.
Yes, yeah, I see
There's
that
a
because it's
theme.
also it's doing two things, right? I mean, it's saving energy because again, you guys are more important to sizing the chiller plant than the mechanical engineer, quite frankly. And two, it has to deliver some beauty or class or status, right?
I don't know actually. The two fabric systems we specified, it was basically one that is controlling the glare at the top. So it's associated with the clear story. This is another thing you see in buildings. It's like it's a strategy that's enduring. You see a lot of in mid-century architecture where you do the top clear story that brings daylight in. And then the bottom panel is about, vision, right? Or a smaller glazed opening. So these two fabrics are associated with the top and the bottom and how we function the different areas of the facade. Sorry, I don't know if I'm explaining that.
I'll be.
So I was going to.
No, that's.
Sorry.
Well, I was going to say the next piece of that is there's the kind of the daylight enhancing component of it, and then there's the solar control component of it.
Exactly.
And both of those are there to enhance the spaces behind them, right? One, that we can get light further back into the building, but then two, recognize that we're in an east-west orientation. We could see a lot of discomfort through the glazing where we do have it if we're not controlling that. All of that, that's for people who are occupying those spaces, and we put people around the building in those, right at the edge there, so that they have those views and that connection to either the campus or in this is in Philadelphia, or to look at Center City. But the other driver there, which the facade has to do, is it has to manage the loads, and particularly, in that climate, the design case is cooling, design day cooling in the summertime. And those kind of, I'll call them like non-lab spaces. And the driver there is to get the water temperature, in let's say a medium chilled water system, as kind of high as it can be, because that's going to be more comfortable. The steam radiator in the corner isn't comfortable because it's wicked hot, and then it's cold on the other side of the
Did
room.
I just hear an architect try to enhance the efficiency of a chiller by getting the temperature up? Oh my God, Adam.
in cold water systems? Yes.
Yeah.
That's why I asked Eric to join, guys.
Michelle.
I also want to bring the hot water down, right? So
do you know how much cooling you've saved with that? Has that been modeled out?
Yeah. I have real numbers.
Just roughly on a
I can't quote. Oh gosh. Well, let's put it this way. No, that's the natural ventilation number, so that's not going to come. Well, I can show another. I'll have to get back to you on that.
That's all right. No, I'm just interested because I did a high-end lab project in Canada, and we had a big west facade, and we put a permanent fritted mesh about 3 foot away. We modeled that out. That was nearly 30% of cooling capacity saved.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's similar range, maybe more.
It's similar.
I think.
Yeah. We still have the problem children, on any building, which is the corners. That's going to be where you're going to have the most amount of facade. But you start with the facade, the skin of the building, and then we have to work our way in. And there's a lot of back and forth between. Well, this is actually kind of a funny thing. We're sitting in the architect seat and driving the boat, and we have mechanical engineers that we can talk with, that we can have an exchange and discussion. And we have our other climate engineers. And it's not a back and forth. It's actually a bit of a kind of a triangle circle talk. And our climate engineers are advocating, and our mechanical engineers are advocating for their part, and we're advocating for another. And I would say, all three of these working kind of in sync are pushing each other to kind of get this result. And Michelle and I are getting information from Transolar, for instance, that we need to respond to, that we're going to give the mechanical engineer, and the mechanical engineer is going to give us, a response back. That has everything to do with how much surface area of, terminal cooling, whether it's a radiant ceiling or a chilled sail or things like that, or if it's how much transfer air that we need in order to make the natural ventilation, system work passively. We need so much free area, right? We need so much free area. So there's a bit of these technical components that all need to get right-sized, and there's a whole design exercise into making that architecture. But we need those three people to kind of help, solve that problem or kind of create.
I'll put my developer hat on here, and as a developer, I used to have to give things to FM teams. So the FM guy would say to me, "How am I going to clean that?"
Yeah.
And then I don't see a cleaning cradle. Is there a cleaning cradle that comes down, or how does that all work?
This project is all bosun chair. That was a big discussion. There's never a
bosun chair going down there. Oh, that looks cool.
On a couple places, yes, but then the other, I started with that.
Or?
No. I started with that because that's the most provocative answer. The other answer is that we looked very carefully at the different lift configurations that were on the market at that time, and we didn't pick the one that was way up in the far corner. But that most of that facade, and I'll just throw a number out there. Michelle, maybe you know what it is. Ryan did a lot of that analysis. I'd say like 85 to 90% of that facade can be cleaned with a lift.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
Right. Okay. Yeah, I guess it's a low rise-ish building, right? It's only 1, 2, 3 years, not that.
Yeah. And it's, I would say on the east side, if you're looking at photographs, it's a fairly flat facade. On the west side, you get a couple of these overhangs, and it's really just in these kind of overhangs in these kind of tricky areas where somebody's got to drop down. But the idea was, as a client, it's a very tough sell to say, hey, just go get on a bosun chair and do all this work. So there was a mandate, on this one to say, even the landscape plaza out in front of it, that was a design exercise with our landscape engineers and structural engineers to say, hey, you may not realize this, but we've got to design this thing to clean the facade. And well, these are pavers on the ground. I'm like, yeah, but we've got to do that. And that's part of the overall picture.
How did you get on with the contractor? Because when you get a complicated high-performance facade, managing a contractor, it makes you want to kill yourself sometimes, in my experience. So how did that go?
So we had, Michelle, I think there's probably, we both should respond to this because I think on any project, you have to lay the groundwork for collaboration and for leading not only within kind of the direction of the project, but for everybody that's involved. And I think you have to set an example there. And I think we were really lucky and fortunate to have contractor partners who understood what they were getting into, realized that they're going to bring things to the table and that they need us to bring things to the table and vice versa. And I think we also had project management and leadership on the owner side that trusted both of us, let's say, to do the right thing. And that's so important. This is going to sound funny, and it's probably it always comes off wrong, but I feel like the buildings are the easy part. And if I really and this is a bit of my 20-year-old self saying I could do anything. Like this is, if you gave it to me, I can do all of that, and we can do all of that. Like it's just material. But it's people, and it's the people are the hard part. And that's the part that I always kind of cringe when I say it. But people are the hard part. And Michelle and I listen to a lot of music, and we're not talking about architecture or facades or something. We're talking about classical music
or food.
Or food. Yeah. Like, those are just
the three essentials of life: architecture, classical music. Yeah.
The trifecta.
So, I think there's this, if you go to a concert, you've got this kind of buy-in and understanding that everybody's going to start at the same beat, and I think that was the part that never worked for me because it was too ephemeral. It would just go away. I love doing the buildings because we can touch it and put it down and, grab it and put it over there, and we can kind of do some redos. But the essence of like starting all at the same part and then executing those pieces, that still runs true. But we just get the benefit of, having it in our hands and it not disappearing after the performance. So anyway, maybe those are a couple thoughts on like how you interact with contractors, but I feel like they are critical to the building. It's critical to get the right relationships established. And I can't, this was a great team.
I've got one more question and I'll shut up. Sorry, Michelle, were you going to say?
Yeah, I mean, whenever I see like a picture of an awesome facade, I'm not only interested in the architect, but I always want to know like who the facade contractors and who their subs are. Who was the metal? Was it some guy from Italy? One of my favorite things of this job is, picking the facade contractor. And we usually, for some reason, draw stuff that's not completely, standardized. There's usually some element that's very aspirational or different. So usually the contractors will differentiate themselves depending on how they respond to our brief. And it's usually a self-selecting group that's sometimes the cheapest or offering some competitive advantage because they're motivated to do something interesting, or they have a unique way to build something that's not standard. So we always kind of find the most interesting partners by the virtue of what we put out there in our bid documents. We do a lot of design assist where we meet lots of different fabricators. So it's one of my favorite things, and I have so much respect for everybody who's involved. From the people working the metal, the tradespeople, the journeymen. It's like one of my favorite things.
Facade contracting's hard, right? Sorry, mate. I've got one question. Facade contracting's hard because, you got to be a big beast to do it, and they all have lunch together, right? So it's hard to get a good price. But just on this facade, one more thing. This is really one question, sort of layered twice. Was this an R&D project? And really what I'm asking is, what's the service life and longevity of this facade?
We did a lot of research. It's a really good question. The ETFE, the foil has 30 to 50 years. Right. We also analyzed it against aluminum. Perforated aluminum has a similar lifespan, to be quite frank. And when you replace it, the embodied energy of perforated aluminum was something like, I think it was 10 times the amount of the carbon emissions associated with the production of the material. So we analyzed the lifetime over 100 years in terms of the carbon investment and the carbon payback, and kind of a parallel exercise. Is this made out of laminated glass? Is it perf aluminum, something that everybody knows? Or is it this lightweight 0.2 millimeter thick material?
Adam, was your question a bit about like the one that we were talking about with the materials, or is it a bit about
I was interested about the material because I've not come across that material before, but I'm also, once you've been a developer for a long time with a big buildings, you can't turn it off, you're always on. And I'm just I'm thinking, what's the service life here? How am I going to maintain it? Is it going to look good after 10 years? 10 years is the line for me where if it's a horrible facade, it can look great on handover. But 5-10 years down the road, that thing can look like shit, right? Yeah. If it's not done well.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah.
Well, I was going to say, go ahead, Robert.
Well, I'm listening to you guys chat, and I'm thinking to myself, in terms of your fee structures, how do you, because what you're doing, I mean, the nuances and how much research work has to go on, and all of the dialogue that goes into these. How do you make money off of that in terms of your fees? I mean, if you're working on a fixed contract and then all of a sudden you got so many hours allocated to a certain subject matter, and then all of a sudden, we need more time in this. How do you rationalize that? How do you get your head around that?
It's a good question. It's a challenge. We were certainly going into it all with eyes wide open, And we do bring a few people to the team that if you look at, let's say, the makeup of another team, you might not see them there. So you have mentioned earlier, not everybody needs a facade consultant. And I would agree, like not every project is going to necessarily need a facade consultant, but there's going to need to be a level of expertise that's necessary. And if you can do that in-house, you can do that in-house, right?
Yeah.
And then, in terms of, so I guess maybe to clue you in a little bit on our kind of attitude there is that we do need a facade and we do need to design for climate, and we do need usually some systems and some engineering to kind of make all that happen. And in that case, they're not in-house, and we have some really great partners. So we do a little bit of a trade-off and balancing to be able to bring them on, knowing that they're going to do it better than we can. And we need to kind of be a bit of a generalist in our approach and use them, as design people, as architects in a way, as designers. And I think, I would go back maybe to, Transolar, for instance. You could call them an engineering, firm, but they're very much a design firm. And I'd also like to think of, the mechanical engineers that we work with, they're designers. And so if you kind of think about it that way, I mean, you asked me, how do we make the numbers work? I think we fundamentally kind of have to think about them as being designers on the team, producing engineered results. And it works.
Part of that dilution is part of the dilution of your fees is, so you're not diluting or seeing a whole bunch of parasitic losses as you're kind of bringing in these other partners to share in that risk. Like in their fee structures, they're quoting you.
Well,
so
we've worked together enough to understand kind of how maybe put it a different way. If we use the analogy of shopping and building buildings off of, things that are in a catalog, it's all going to add up.
Yeah.
Right? If you're treating them all as individual kind of pieces, and that's the mind frame. But we're aiming to do an integrated design here. And so I think, although you've got to put a number on each one of those folks, we kind of go into it with that approach. And it's not always perfect.
We had one of Adam's colleagues on previously on the show, and we were talking about BIM and software design, and like the learning curve is so steep, and the parasitic loss on profits due to learning about the tool. But ultimately, all those learning experiences benefit the software developer. And we ask the question, like, shouldn't, in this case, it was Autodesk, be paying you to learn their software? Because, the feedback, there's a value to that, right? And I'm always intrigued about the financial part of it, because I know when I was practicing, I would do things and I would ask our team to do things that weren't in the original fee structure, just because we wanted the building to be better, right? And we just, we would eat it. And it was just like, when do you stop eating?
I kind of struggle with that. We try to stay in touch with our clients afterwards, particularly, when it comes to, are things working the way they're supposed to be working? Are people comfortable? And we've had some really great success here in North America maintaining those relationships and building those relationships. So we, for instance, we still get some data from one of our clients on their utilities and cost. And I'm working on establishing that kind of routine with the Philadelphia project. And all that's to say is, they didn't hire us to do this kind of post-occupancy, energy or building performance piece. I have an invested interest in the next projects to learn what we've done. Yeah. And that's something we're just gonna do, because I can't sell that at the beginning of the project.
Right.
Because I haven't actually delivered yet. And so it's hard to put and get buy-in to spend money at the end when you don't really know what it is that you're creating yet. So we do absorb some things that we get the benefit of learning from, but they also get the benefit of our reaction. And we're here as a service. So I think we have to find a balance there. We got to stay in business too. So
that's exactly it. Yeah. Adam, that was sort of the same response, is that, that in terms of learning about BIM, is that every time your knowledge and of the function of the software tool advances, it makes you that much better in terms of your vision is much more long term. Every time you make a mistake or struggle to learn something or struggle to integrate something, you're learning, and that learning process. How do you?
This is gonna, guys. We're gonna have to do another podcast on this because I've played a role of a bit of a BIM manager. I wouldn't say that at all. Guru, in the office, kind of helping us, work within kind of our what would you call it? Having our protocols and having kind of a way of doing it. But and then bringing a lot of that to our German offices. And Germany, you'd kind of be surprised, is a bit more conservative about project delivery in terms of documenting.
Not surprised.
And so, if the US was doing BIM, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, it's only been within the last 5 years or 6 years, maybe a little bit more, that the German market is starting to adopt. And our colleagues in Germany are starting to go through those heartaches. But this is maybe TMI, but we still have active AutoCAD drawing happening on day one, because it means, and I would argue that AutoCAD is only a step, in terms of technology beyond drafting with a pen and paper. I don't know totally. Exactly. It doesn't offer a whole lot, but what it does offer is get rid of the bullshit that comes with designing in BIM. Mm-hmm. And I would say, one problem in some of our education environments right now is we're teaching design through the tools that you use to document a project. And what we bring to the table and how students are able to generate design content is through that lens. And you can't go anywhere with that. If you can only deliver through what the software engineers can provide, then we're really handcuffing the possibilities out there. So, it's going to be a little cliche to argue for hand drawing and going back to the basics, but as we started off before we got it going with the podcast, we're building models here because there's an intrinsic value and dialogue that's happening while you're doing that. That's design, and you have to do that.
I always joke with Adam, every once in a while, that when I retired, my tools were Excel, Visio, and an old copy of AutoCAD Lite.
Yeah.
And it's because those were 3 stable platforms that anybody could learn.
Yeah.
But I always coveted that, the computer jockeys that were doing this amazing modeling, and I always thought, when I grow up I want to be that, and then I realized, well, I'm 65 years old, so
maybe I got to add one thing to that, because I was listening to one of your previous podcasts with John Listerbrook from Building Science. And you guys were talking about modeling, and he had this kind of commentary about modeling, and that was really kind of fascinating, that I can relate to big time. And there's a lot of companies out there that are advertising for BIM modeling in terms of energy and doing this kind of like overall. And I kind of feel like, you don't really know what's happening underneath the hood there. And it's churning about a bunch of stuff. And we keep finding ourselves bringing a particular design approach that you can't plug into these things. And so, if we're only designing things to those models or to those modeling capabilities, then we're really not going to get any further than what they were designed for. And so I think we see a lot of our partners doing real basic calculations and making, kind of good grounded assumptions on real data in order to prove out, or at least, suggest that the direction we're going with the pen facade, for instance, is going to work out. But there's a lot of Excel and kind of raw processing there. That's a lot of hand-holding of information. That's not plugging it into some generic model that we don't really understand how it's working and then expecting, some outcome. We just don't know how they're dealing with those generalizations.
That's the problem.
Yeah, guys like Joe, we got Joe on, and I, as the podcast sort of revealed, I've known of Joe a long time, but I think one of the things that happens with all of us, when we're in the industry so long, is we develop an intuition You call it the problem child. I call it rogue zones because I got in trouble once using problem childs. And so, um, but you can look at a set of drawings or concept drawings, and you can tell right off the bat, like the rogue zones that, yeah, those are going to be problems just because of the facing or the way the idea, the geometry of that particular problem. But the tools allow you to sort of, I don't know, extract out just the scope of the problem. Like, it's going to be a problem, but how big of a problem is it? And that's one thing you kind of miss with the Excel tools and the basic tools. Some like the computational fluid dynamics or the finite element analysis.
Yeah.
Really helped Michelle, like in terms of facade design, like understanding thermal bridging, for example, and all the connection points and how we can eliminate as many of those as we can without compromising the structure. Those tools, to me, they seem to be they have a high utility.
Mm-hmm.
So.
All right. So listen, we're coming up on time. I can't believe we've been talking nearly for an hour and a half. Just
right. Has it been really?
We could have just doubled it.
Well, so we might have to
double issue.
We might have to have a part 2 here because this is a hot topic.
Yeah.
But just to finish on some sort of quick fire questions, I've got one for you, Michelle. Interested in hearing you talk about Hong Kong and Jardine House. So I used to go to Hong Kong a lot before the handover. My friend was in the police. I tried to be in the police. They don't have asthmatic mutants like me. So, but was it the locals call that building the building of 1,000 assholes, right?
What?
That's not how I remember it, but
that's how the police told me about it. Because it's sort of a Jardine, so it's just this building with loads of round holes in it, and the locals called it the building of 1,000 assholes, which is hilarious to me.
Well, you should actually ask Michelle what they call the Harvard Science and Engineering Complex, because we tend to just call it what people have called it before.
People have made weird collages, and they made a collage like a giant cheese grater. It was another project we did with the sunshade that was very articulated.
Oh, there's a cheese grater in London. It's the Richard Rogers building. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah,
I worked on that. Well, my colleague worked on that. Sort of just to have a quick fire question to finish. I go backwards and forwards with facade engineering. When I first started, and I'm again old as hell, right? There was no facade engineers. There was architects. And fast forward all these years, there's facade engineers everywhere. So architects, are they artists or technologists? You can only pick one. Michelle?
Artist.
I knew you'd say that. And I'm on board. 100%. Yes. That was easy, right? Because architecture is an art form, right? It's an expression of art.
We're culture makers, right?
Yeah, absolutely. 100%.
And when you see all these buildings in Germany, the post-war buildings, they're all like highly engineered. There's no soul. I mean, we travel to Germany a lot, and you can tell the old fabric and the new. I mean, there's a lot of great new architecture, but in general, they're not done with artistry in mind, and people don't enjoy them.
And this is the people that bought you Bauhaus. I'm a big fan of Bauhaus. So it's an echo of Art Deco for me. Anyway, sorry, we digress. But I agree with that 100%. But if architects are artists, is the facade engineer a specialism that is just a separate thing now but adjacent?
I don't believe so. I mean, the terminology, thinking about art, it's like we're creating art for people, artistic space for them to inhabit on the inside. It's not just a visual art, but it's an experiential art. In terms of the engineers, for us, we love working with them because they minimize the material. They can maximize the efficiency of a certain system. They understand the kind of fabricators who are good at making things. So for the engineering, it's like I said before, like so many of our projects wouldn't look the way they do without our engineers, because they're experts in minimizing material use, making them efficient, which makes it beautiful and which makes it, an artistic place to inhabit, right?
But that's
because it's something that's not
separate to the architect, right? You don't see them two things merging in the future? Or?
It's really hard for me to separate it, because you can't create the artistry without their knowledge and their know-how, right? Like the contractor, the fabricator, facade engineer, you can't deliver a good artistic product without the expertise. As an architect, you're driving the vision, right? How it performs, what's driving it. But then it's just like this orchestra analogy that Erick and I always talk about. You need you need the brass, you need the strings, you need percussions. Without them, you don't have the art, right?
Agreed. So there's a symbiosis there that's really hard to break, right?
Yeah.
Okay, I agree with that.
My question actually revolves around the thermal optical properties. My world changed when I started to learn about emissivity, absorptivity, transmissivity, connectivity, all these ivity words. Yeah, and when I started to understand that, my world as an engineer changed, and I was able to, and colors too, right? Like the impact the colors had on heat transfer, and where, like in terms of architectural programs and engineering programs, that word seems to be absent. I didn't learn that program till I'd been out of school almost 15 years. Are we teaching that in school today?
I personally did not learn it.
No. And University of Oregon has some pretty great, robust technical core classes to augment their design studios in this whole realm. And we did talk about a lot of that stuff, and they do teach a lot of that stuff. But there's only, in design education, you've got these brackets, right? And you've got to fit design education within those brackets. And so if you start putting one thing in, something has to kind of come back out too. So and we know that buildings are incredibly complicated, in terms of the depth and breadth of kind of knowledge and experience that you need to do these things. So I would say, some schools, you might get that and the different emphasis they have on the technical delivery in a way, but I would argue that it may not actually it shouldn't be necessarily bundled up in the kind of the technical aspect. It's a quality of something that you can design with in a way. If that makes sense. So I think you have to understand it in concepts, but you might not necessarily need to know the word and the values behind it.
But Robert, the reason why is because, they're designing in the computer all day. You're sitting in front of a screen with a little mouse. You're moving your fingertip like millimeter range. So of course, there's not going to be that drive to design with things that are so important with, just understanding that stone feels different, a metal, and they heat up at different rates. And, we're not designing for the students in the studios are not going to be able to experience the kind of materials that they apply visually to their models because they're designing in this environment. Now, there is a huge trend to be building like these large scale facade mock-ups. I don't know if you're following all this like social media stuff, but I think there's a huge return and kind of push from the younger students being like, I want to understand how these things come together. I don't want to do Rhino anymore and do these like kind of superficial buildings. They want to understand how these assemblies come together. So I think there's actually there's a lot of hope because there's backlash against designing things that are just in the visual digital environment that are actually terrible spaces to be in.
And they don't have any there's no understanding.
Yeah, there's no gravity.
There's technically no gravity.
I find all of those words really connect to the human experience. They're technical terms, but they really connect to how we see, how we hear, how we feel.
Yes.
All of that. And so they're hugely important. And anyways, yeah.
And it's even more important now because we're more and more in the computer on our phones, right? So we're craving that.
Right.
And we have to kind of extract ourselves from that purely digital exploration and propagation of architectural visual culture.
Yeah.
To the question that Adam
comments.
had to Michelle about, artist or the technical, it's the artist piece, but you have to understand like what the different parts are and like how to work with them. And so we are very much generalists in a way and have to be in order to understand how these things kind of all work with each other. And then we get some engineers who are also designers who know how to use the terms, use the technical aspects of it to make something, and then provide us feedback.
So the architect can't be a pure artist. He has to be a generalist with technology as well, right?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely.
It's like applied art. I think.
Yeah. It's applied. Yeah, that's the right word. Applied art. Yes.
Yeah, absolutely.
Perfect.
Awesome.
That was a great way to finish. You got the final word in there, Michelle, and that was spot on.
Perfect.
Thanks for coming on the show, you guys. It's it's just awesome. And Michelle, I know when you reached out, and I thought, and then some of the folks from Trans Solar, and then you thought, well, we should bring in Erick, and I thought, this would be a great show, and it turns out we could keep talking all day long,
even without our
thank you
gear.
for that. Yeah.
Thank you so much, guys.
No, this was a great episode, and hopefully very inspirational. I'm a big fan of Sexy Facades. Always will be. Thanks for coming on. That was awesome. Great. Thank you.
The Edifice Complex will continue in just a moment.
Are you passionate about the built environment? Do you want to learn from the industry's most inspiring, intelligent, and accomplished professionals? Then the companion to this podcast, Wisdom of the Property Crowd, is just the book for you. From Edifice Complex podcast interviews, this book distills the critical thinking, insight, and ideas of some of the property industry's most accomplished and respected practitioners. Each chapter is a synopsis of an hour-plus interview, capturing the takeaways and insights, including diagrams and images, to help explain concepts and ideas. There's also a brief bio about the interviewee and a QR code linked to the podcast episode for those that want to explore further. These are the mentors you wish you had in college. Wisdom of the Property Crowd by Adam Muggleton. Available on Amazon worldwide.
And now, back to the show.
Awesome episode, and big shout out to Michelle and Erick for joining us. And these conversations where you get more than three people, you and I guess, like when you have a fourth or a fifth, I mean, it adds another dimension to it. And this particular one, it was really good because I remember when Michelle, like I was ranting, right, as I do, and she, texted me and said, yeah, like this is, talk about the four pillars of design, architecture, enclosure, interior, and then mechanical electricals are really the cleanup crew. Like most problems should be solved with the architecture and the enclosure, right? And then when she said, well, yeah, we should get Erick in on this dialogue, and so this is the result. It was an excellent discussion.
Facades fascinate me. When you're a developer, there's sort of the big three cost items are cost of steel or concrete, cost of elevators, cost of facade. Everything else is pretty much a rounding error.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
So totally. If you get those three things right, if you screw up elsewhere, you're good.
Yeah. Well, you and I have been lamenting for so long about why radiant heating and cooling is not used in North America as much as it is used elsewhere in the world. And I remember talking to one contractor, it was on a larger project, and it was like a commercial retail, and they were talking about the cost of PEX pipe for embedded the pipe. And I said, do you know that the cost of the PEX pipe that you're trying to get down, this is something that's permanently embedded in the concrete. So why do you want to put in less? Because that affects the efficiency of the system and the comfort of the floor. And it's something you're not going to replace. Like you want to have the highest quality pipe that you can and the most of it because it has all these benefits. And I said on the bottom line, like on an item on a spreadsheet, the costing spreadsheet, that represents not 0.0001% of the total construction cost. Like your focus is on the wrong thing. But
you know why, right? We touched on this, right? There is an utter disconnect to this very day between the occupants and everyone else who puts that building together and hands it over.
Yeah, totally.
If you're that contractor, and this is normal, I'm not shitting on them, you are totally encouraged to cut every corner and save every cost possible. Because there's not a single consequence that will fall on you for doing that.
Yeah.
Not one. So, if he could half that PEX pipe in and save, I don't know, $5,000.
Yeah.
There is zero consequence to that person for doing that.
On a $50 million project, right?
Yeah, it's all upside, though. It's all upside for him, right? He gets most importantly, he gets the pat on the back for, look what I saved, boss. Well done, you, right? And this is why, somehow I've got very mixed feelings about the Wellbeing certification or the Well certification, right? But at least it's trying to connect the occupants to the design of the building, right?
Yeah.
I had this big philosophical debate with the head of smart building somewhere, right? I'm saying, look, and they were really just focusing on energy. I said, what about IEQ? Let's just take all those points.
Yeah.
Even if you've got BMS or BAS, you can monitor most of them things. Are you doing that? No. You know why? Because there's no advocacy for the occupants.
Yeah.
Why does energy get focused on? Because the benefit falls to the owner, right?
Yeah. I get the feeling in talking to Erick and Michelle that, we didn't talk. Didn't even come up actually in our dialogue. But you get the feeling that Behnisch and the design team, which includes Michelle and Erick, that's just inherent in their design. Like you get the feeling that they think about those things without even having to meet some sort of requirement of a program.
You can see they care about their work and they're deep thinkers, right?
Yeah.
But they're up against a machine, a client who's looking at a first cost issue and no connection to the occupants. And so they're caught between those, it's like getting caught between divorced parents. They're stuck, right? It's like, Mummy, and she go, what about the cost? And Daddy, what about my comfort? It's like,
yeah.
It's a tough one, man.
And it is, and as architects, they are the punching bag. Like they get and I've been guilty in the past of drawing attention to sort of the challenges that I face with architects, but their role is changing, and I love their answers and bringing awareness to the nuances that they have to, as architects, that they have to look at today that they didn't have to look at it in the past.
Yeah,
it's a different role, and both of them said that, particularly Michelle, she was saying like there's a agency that architects have, and Erick said it as well, that they bring to the table. It was sort of on my radar screen, but kind of on the peripheral. But having this dialogue that we had with them, I hope people understand that what they're experiencing is very much on the center part of the radar screen in terms of property development. Like they do have a role to play, and they do have influence, and but I think to have them be less abused, for lack of a better word, is we're not really aware of their contributions. Like as engineers, we don't really know.
They stand between mummy and daddy, right? So engineers, let's face it, are handmaidens to architects on jobs, right? So they hit the architect with all their frustrations. But I can tell you, I'd be a developer. Architects, I would describe as being master influencers, but have zero power, actually. They have to work to a budget. If the client doesn't like it, no, do it again, right? And the engineers, everyone below them, don't actually see that relationship.
No, they don't.
So architects present as very powerful, but they're actually master influences, all soft power, not hard power.
Yeah. You see that in design charrettes.
Yeah.
Where there's honesty in the room.
Yeah.
And where people aren't afraid to rock the boat or draw attention to things that are with the flaws. Because if the client's paying attention, and they'll look at the architect and they'll say, yeah, okay, let's relook at this.
Yeah.
Is this really what we want for our occupants? Yeah, probably not.
That's why I go back to that meeting where that guy stood up and said, if I don't get LEED Platinum, every company in this is going to be sued, and just walked out the door. That was his intro to the design charrette. I tell you what, we threw everything at the wall, sustainability-wise, that stuck. It just fucking, did it.
Yeah.
That's where that big West Facade come from, that fixed, fridging thing, and it worked. It was low maintenance. It was passive. You could clean it. It just worked great.
Yeah.
And that would never have come out if that guy hadn't stood up and threatened us. Basically, that would never have been on the table.
Yeah. Fritting is another element that people don't talk about enough. And I remember, I don't know because we've had Peter Simmons on a couple times, I think, and he, of course, worked on the Bangkok airport, and the fritting on that glass was really, really looked at to reduce some of the solar.
I don't know why it's not spoken about more. And it can be an artistic expression as well, right?
Absolutely, it can be. Yeah,
it's a twofer.
Yeah. If people want to understand what that is, you can actually see the fritting in automobile glass when you've got certain sunglasses on.
Yeah. Yep.
You look out, you can actually see it, right?
Yeah.
If you take the sunglasses off, it just looks like a clear pane of glass. But if you put on your sunglasses, you can see, the different shading, I guess that's how you look at it. But it plays a huge, huge role. Anyways, you asked the question of Michelle, and the answer came out of her, which was kind of like, like this applied art. And it is, isn't it?
It
Architecture.
It's applied art. So it's not enough just to be an artist. It's not enough to just be a technologist. You got to be able to pull that together. That's the skill, right?
Yeah.
And she nailed that. Actually, I thought pretty well there. That was like the mic drop. Done. Out.
Yeah.
Michelle gone.
Yeah. And exactly. And in Erick's case, it was what really triggered me was his talking about tree forts. Tree houses.
I like that. Tree fort as a metaphor for like the environment. And the building, right? That is a clever metaphor, actually. He's a deep thinker, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, ultimately, when you look at these professionals that work on these massive, iconic buildings, ultimately, every one of them go home to their own houses and have to deal with their own stuff, the discomfort, the lighting, the sound, the odors, all of that kind of stuff. And so they live it. But in case of Erick, he's talking about tree forts. Well, that just takes it even down deeper into Mother Nature and the world that we live in. And, once you understand the fundamental principles that are around you, you apply it on whatever scale you want.
No, that was they were both deep thinkers. I really like them. Anyway, I think they're a good example. Like that, they represent like where the profession's going in terms of like putting the technology and the art together. So if you're listening to this and you want to be a facade engineer / technologist / architect, these are your people.
Yeah, absolutely.
Anyway, mate, I shall see you on the next one.
Okay, Adam. Cheers, man.
Take care. Bye.
You've been listening to the Edifice Complex podcast with Adam Muggleton and Robert Bean. To access show notes for this episode, visit edificecomplexpodcast.com. If you have enjoyed this podcast, please leave us a review on iTunes. See you next time.